The Cybernetic Foundry as it stands. Charting the course between the static pathway and the negotiable quest.
MXTM, aka Vitsu, January 23, 2026. Subject, Pirate First, MXTM. Role, Implementation Agent, ChatGPT. Introduction. The Cybernetic Foundry returns from a period of silent documentation and strategic refinement. As it stands, the project has transitioned from the white heat of initial compilation into a colder, more analytical phase of architectural definition. We have moved beyond the question of can we build it, to the more critical question of how do we freeze it for others. The session recorded and back from another hiatus.txt reveals a project sitting in a state of high potential fragmentation. While the technical metal is hot, with a dual-homed relay architecture and verified cryptographic identity, the project currently lacks the deployable packaging necessary for the wider diaspora to inherit. The current reality is a tale of two domains: sovereignrelay.xyz, which represents the canonical presence, the static, boring, and resilient pathway, and provisioner.quest, which represents conditional capability, the flexible, negotiable logistics layer. This separation of powers is the project's most significant conceptual breakthrough to date. It ensures that the author's work remains accessible through the pathway, regardless of whether the provisioning layer is active. This is not a failure of integration, but a masterpiece of fail-closed design. As we stand at the threshold of the next week of rations, the mission is clear. We must move from a private jurisdiction to a deployable git-based lifeboat that any sovereign actor can launch with minimal friction. Sovereign Pathway. What this is? Sovereign Pathway is a boundary layer. It exists to separate public presence from private intent in sovereign infrastructure. This project does not run services, negotiate payments, provision devices, or automate trust. It defines how those things are kept apart. If a relay is a lighthouse and a provisioner is a shipyard, the pathway is the shoreline, visible, stable, and deliberately boring. Why this exists? Most decentralized systems fail for the same reason. They collapse visibility, intent, and custody into a single surface. When presence implies agency, systems accrete power. When negotiation happens where identity is broadcast, users become legible, enumerable, governable. Sovereign Pathway exists to prevent that collapse. It formalizes a non-negotiating, non-custodial, non-provisioning layer whose only job is to exist publicly, resolve canonically, delegate elsewhere. Nothing more. What this is not. Sovereign Pathway explicitly refuses to be a relay, a wallet, a coordinator, a payment processor, a provisioning service, a governance mechanism, a UX layer. If you are looking for features, you are in the wrong place. If you are looking for constraints, you are home. Core principles. 1. Presence without intent. The pathway may be reachable, indexed, mirrored, or cached. It must never negotiate, decide, sign, hold secrets. Any system that can make decisions can be coerced. 2. Canonical but replaceable. A pathway endpoint may be considered canonical at a moment in time. Canon is descriptive, not authoritative. Canonical endpoints can move. Mirrors are expected. Forks are allowed. Continuity is achieved through documentation and cryptographic reference, not DNS permanence. 3. Delegation, not integration. The pathway never integrates downstream systems. Instead, it points to provisioners, to relays, to documentation, to capability descriptions. Delegation is explicit. Coupling is avoided. Relationship to other components. Sovereignrelay.xyz. The relay provides event availability, public synchronization, non-custodial message transport. The pathway does not configure the relay, does not authorize the relay, does not depend on relay uptime. It may reference the relay as canonical. Provisioner.quest. Provisioners are where intent is expressed. Capabilities are negotiated. Payments are coordinated. Devices are empowered. The pathway never provisions, never negotiates, never mediates. It exists so provisioners do not need to be public infrastructure. Threat model, high level. Sovereign pathway assumes network observers exist. Indexers are hostile by default. Availability will fluctuate. Operators may disappear. Therefore, it is designed to leak nothing sensitive, hold nothing valuable, require no secrets. Survive abandonment. A pathway that needs protection is already compromised. Minimal surface area. A valid sovereign pathway implementation may be nothing more than a DNS name, a Tor onion address, a static document. If adding a feature feels helpful, it is probably wrong. Intended audience. This project is for relay operators who do not want to become authorities, protocol designers who care about power boundaries, builders who understand that absence is a feature. It is not for startups, platforms, growth hackers, people who say just add status. This repository is intentionally incomplete. Its purpose is to freeze intent, not to ship software. Changes should be rare, slow, and justified. Final note. If you are unsure how to use Sovereign Pathway, that is expected. If you are tempted to improve it, resist. The pathway works precisely because it refuses to do anything interesting. What's in the canvas now is a clean intent anchor, not a sales README, not a deploy guide, not a manifesto that leaks operational detail. That's exactly what Sovereign Pathway needs to be at this stage. A few high-level notes before we touch anything else. Dashboard. This README correctly refuses functionality. That's rare and important. The separation between presence, relay, and provisioner is now legible to outsiders without teaching them how to copy you blindly. You've implicitly encoded your power model without naming enemies or vendors. That's good OPSEC and good longevity. It reads like something that can sit unchanged for years and still be true. That's the real test. Provisioner.quest. Purpose. Provisioner.quest is a negotiation and empowerment layer, not a hosting platform and not a relay. It exists to enable temporary, explicit, cryptographically bounded capability between sovereign actors. Where Sovereign Pathway establishes presence without dependency, Provisioner.quest enables action without permanence. No user is on board. No service is subscribed to. No infrastructure is delegated. Capability is granted, used, and released. Design principle, empowerment without delegation. Provisioning is often confused with control. It does not assume custody. Dashboard. The cyber provisioning is often confused with control. Provisioner.quest rejects that model. It does not assume custody. It does not retain authority. It does not require continuous availability. Empowerment is scoped, time-bounded, revocable, cryptographically verifiable. Nothing here is implicit. Nothing here is silent. What Provisioner.quest does. At a high level, Provisioner.quest enables negotiation of temporary roles, relay operator, signer, host, courier. Exchange of capability manifests, what may be done, for how long, under which constraints. Coordination of sovereign infrastructure events without persistent trust. Examples, non-exhaustive. Negotiating a pay-join v2 transaction flow without shared servers. Coordinating silent payments metadata exchange without leaking graph structure. Temporarily empowering an edge device to act as a .md content host. Granting a relay-adjacent role without exposing relay keys. What provisioner.quest explicitly does not do. It is not a wallet. It is not a relay. It is not a CDN. It is not a scheduler. It is not an account system. There are no users. There are only participants. Relationship to sovereign pathway. Sovereign pathway provides canonical presence. Provisioner.quest provides conditional capability. The two are intentionally separate. Sovereign pathway must remain boring, static, and resilient. Provisioner.quest must remain flexible, ephemeral, and negotiable. No provisioning action should ever be required to exist. Provisioning is only required to do something together. Operational posture. Stateless by default. State only by explicit agreement. No background daemons assumed. No always-on requirement. If provisioner.quest disappears, nothing breaks. If it reappears, negotiation resumes. This is not a failure mode. It is the design. Security model, high level. Capabilities are explicit artifacts. Keys are never reused across roles. Expiry is mandatory. Silence is interpreted as revocation. The safest state is nothing happening. Status. This project is intentionally incomplete. Implementation details will emerge only when the absence of tooling becomes a blocker, and the intent documented here is insufficient. Until then, this README is the system. License/ethos. Pirate first. Sovereign without spectacle. Capability without captivity. If this makes you uncomfortable, it is working. Conclusion. The Cybernetic Foundry concludes its current assessment with a firm commitment to an operational posture of silence. The defining philosophy moving forward is that the safest state is nothing happening. By designing the provisioner.quest layer to be stateless by default and ephemeral by necessity, Pirate First has created a system where silence is interpreted as revocation and presence is only established through explicit agreement. This is a radical departure from the always-on surveillance capitalism of the modern web. It is a pirate architecture that breathes only when invited to do so. The roadmap for the coming week is a grind toward packaging. The objective is to take the sovereign_ path and turn it into a documented, repeatable ritual, a repository that doesn't just contain code, but contains the intent of the Foundry. We are no longer just running a relay. We are defining a new relationship between authors and their supporters, where provisioning is not a subscription, but a supply line that can be cut or resumed without ever breaking the underlying canon of the work. The forge is steady, the rations are mapped, and the sovereign/provisioner split is now the constitutional law of the node. Receipts, not rhetoric. End of Phase 8. Thanks for reading MXTM's newsletter. Subscribe for free to receive new posts and paypal.me/Martin Chartrand to support my work. Subscribe.
Bolivar, the bankster's liberator. A forbidden history of Simon Bolivar and the invention of modern servitude. MXTM,
The banker's liberator, the debt that called itself freedom. 2 centuries after his bones were dug up for the cameras, Bolivar still owes the world an explanation. Not for what he fought, but for who financed the fight. Behind every cry of liberty was a ledger. Behind every revolution, a banker counting bayonets as assets. And behind the marble hero they sold us, a man broken by Parisian debts, refitted by London credit, and embalmed in interest. The republics that rose in his name were plantations reborn as portfolios. The chains became contracts. The whip, an exchange rate. Freedom, our first and most seductive loan. They called him the liberator. History may yet remember him as the world's first collateralized saint. Hashtag pirate first, hashtag Bolivar, hashtag forbidden history, hashtag debt is empire, hashtag financial colonialism, hashtag the banker's liberator, hashtag history is ledger, hashtag post-empire chronicles, hashtag Parada Primera.
This is awakening. Change begins now.
The
circus survives on reaction. It feeds on outrage, applause, ridicule, belief. It does not care what you think, only that you respond.
From spectacle to survivor, the core reframe. The start building man concept is defined in direct opposition to the principles of ephemeral events like Burning Man, proposing a fundamental shift in intent from temporary escape to permanent resilience. Burning Man as counterpoint. The framework critiques Burning Man as a ritual of temporary abundance and cosplay scarcity. For 1 week, participants simulate a post-scarcity city, often at great expense, 2,000 to 5,000 per person, only to dismantle it and return to their default economic realities. It is an exercise in radical expression and self-organization that proves humans can collaborate, but its creations are designed to disappear. Burning Man asked, what if money disappeared for a week? Core principle, expression. Outcome, a temporary city that is burned, with a leave no trace ethos. Start building man as polarity shift. Start building man flips this polarity. It is not a festival or an escape but a dress rehearsal for civilization repair. It takes the same ingenuity, volunteer density, and hacker ethic found at Burning Man and applies them to a different target, life support, not spectacle. The goal is to build systems that refuse to disappear and to leave a spine of working infrastructure. Start Building Man asks, what if essential provisioning stopped being speculative permanently? Core principle, compression, delivering maximum civilizational value per dollar, watt, liter, and human hour. Outcome, durable, replicable systems that provide for human needs and are designed to be maintained and copied. The central tagline captures this pivot: if it can't feed people, it's just art. Closing statement: restrained, deliberate, calibrated for the highly conscientious readership of MXTM's newsletter. Dear readership, what you have just heard is not a promise, not a pitch, and not a prediction. It is a record of constraints, assembled deliberately, and offered without instruction. Start Building Man does not claim to know how the future should look. It makes a narrower claim, and therefore a more dangerous one, that certain things either work under pressure, or they do not. That certain systems either survive contact with reality, or collapse into narrative. That replication, not growth, is the correct unit of scale when failure is no longer theoretical.
Substack note. The Cybernetic Foundry, as it stands. We've returned from the void with a realization. Sovereignty is boring, and it should stay that way. The provisioner is now split into two distinct spirits. The pathway, sovereignrelay.xyz, is the unmoving anchor, the relay that just is. The quest, provisioner.quest, is the negotiation, the part where we decide how to work together. As it stands, the node is functional but private. The next 7 days are about turning this private forge into a public blueprint. We are building the sovereign lifeboat so that when you sail into the dark, you take the means of production with you. Stateless by default, sovereign by intent. Ex post. The Foundry, status update pirate flag. We've split the architecture. Sovereignrelay.xyz equals the static pathway, resilience. Provisioner.quest equals the negotiable layer, logistics. The node is silent by default. Silence is revocation. Negotiation is explicit. This isn't an account. It's a jurisdiction. Hashtag Nostr, hashtag Sovereign Tech, hashtag Build in Public, hashtag Provisioner, hashtag Cybernetic Foundry. Hashtags. Hashtag Sovereign Pathway, hashtag Provisioner Quest, hashtag Nostr Protocol, hashtag System Architecture, hashtag Digital Sovereignty, hashtag Build in Public, hashtag Cybernetic Foundry, hashtag Pirate First, hashtag Stateless Design, hashtag Information Integrity. Discussion about this episode. Comments. Restax. Recent episodes.
The techno-nomads who arbitrated the fall of nations.
sending quiet venom, smart and slow. Under static, anger spreads, code drips below. No peace in the silence, just a warning. Raw heartbeat sinks with the siren of new war. Bitterness spikes, and I sip on the glitch. Digital venom, pixels twitch. I draw my plans in smoke and zeros tonight. Pirates fracture all their heroes.
Another hero falls, another broken scene. They promised truth, they promised light, but all I got was another sleepless night. Join the fight of solidarity, we're stronger together.
They say I'm going too far, but I'm just who I am. Breaking through the firewall, watch the systems fall. You will never be a billionaire, you stupid fuck. The game is rigged, it's time to say enough.
Will we take the wheel? Will they save us all? We'll play the flow, the clock's ticking fast. Where do we go? Knowledge, power, the future seed belongs to us all, not the lords of greed. Claim it now like the anthem ring. Save your ability to sign this thing.
But every corrupt system falls. Control, alt delete.